feels like they've never been away. Norwich City start their championship campaign with a defeat in South Wales at Cardiff City. Probably not the start Dean Smith, Craig Shakespeare or anyone associated with the club would have wanted, as they attempted to shift the narrative after what was a very disappointing Premier League campaign last year. We'll be picking the bones out of that game. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Sam Seaman, and we've also dipped into the summer transfer window to secure the services of Will Jennings, new PinkUn columnist, also a journalist at SportsBeat, Norwich City fan as well, who's part of the 1300 who made the trip to the Welsh capital yesterday to dissect this one. He's joined us on an emergency loan for this week whilst Paddy Dowett enjoys some time off in Ireland. And you're listening, of course, to the PinkUn.com Norwich City Podcast in association with Future Radio. It's the show that is going to hopefully have a better connection amongst the front three than Norwich City had in Wales on Saturday. Sam, I guess the obvious question to start this show is, and we're going to delve into this in a bit more detail, it's quite an open question to start, but how concerned should we be by Norwich City's opening day defeat to Cardiff?
Well, I was majorly concerned, to be honest. I think I had earmarked this as the time when we were going to find out what Norwich City were, and probably the best time to assess what they're going to be going into the championship season. And I obviously understand rightfully that you can't take everything based off the first game of the season, but there should have been something in there in the 90 minutes that suggested they were going to be up there. I thought there were a couple of things that maybe showed that they could have been in and around mid-table, but there was very little there that looked like a promotion side in waiting. And yeah, it was just quite worrying, as you said. I'm sure we'll delve into the specifics, but the number of issues mounting up is what maybe I thought about a little bit more yesterday than I had for a long while. I think I've had concerns about maybe the creativity and playing style for a little while now, and that came into fruition in pre-season a lot as well. But I thought yesterday there were maybe a few more issues that reared their head that were quite worrying in terms of Norwich City's championship season, and they certainly didn't look like a side that are going to be up there. Obviously, we have to give them time and caveat it with the fact that they've got a couple more new signings still to, well, one that we're thinking might still come into the building, but a couple that they've already confirmed that are yet to pull on the yellow and green shirt. So, yeah, hopefully they can improve massively, but that is what it's going to be. It's what it's going to need to be. It's going to have to be a massive improvement if they're going to be where they want to be this season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned around the new signings of, I think it was NCFC Numbers who tweeted. I think it's the first time since, I'm going to double check this while I'm speaking, but I think he said the first time since 1998 that Norwich have started a season with effectively no new signings, which is quite an incredible place to be, particularly when you kind of add the context of last season and how difficult that was. Dean Smith described the squad as having a losing culture towards the end of the campaign. I was right, it was 98, 99. And also kind of this mentality point that we kind of saw last season, them crumbling under pressure, being beaten probably a lot more heavily than perhaps they should have been. All of this sort of leads to concerns. And again, we're going to delve into this into more detail. But I mean, Will, as we mentioned right at the top of the show, you were part of that away support. What was the mood like amongst Norwich fans who made the trip to Wales? Was it was there an acceptance? There was the opening day that they are going to need time, that Dean Smith is going to need time, or was it actually probably, as Sam said, some of the concerns that has maybe bled into this season from pre-season, but also from what we saw last year as well?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I think, in terms of the away end, it was a combination, really. There were people like myself, I'm normally sort of a glass half full, sort of relatively optimistic sort of fan, thinking, it is the first game, give Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare a bit of time, wait for those new signings to come in and really beef up the midfield and add that extra sort of layer of creativity. But on the whole, it was fairly toxic by full time. Sort of, I think my brother said to me at one point, we could play for 4 hours and not score a goal here. And I think that's the main issue, and the one that, people are sort of flagging on social media, etc., is this lack of cohesion. You watch these players and there doesn't really seem to be a sort of strategy, a sort of, a crystallized plan in place for how we're actually going to score a goal. I think, defensively was fine. I thought Andrew Omobamidele was one of the few positives, really mature on possession, such a classy operator on the ball. Obviously, sounds ridiculous saying defence wasn't an issue when one of your centre-backs gets sent off. But I think, that end of the pitch looks fine, but it's just in possession. I thought we left so much to be desired. And I want to give Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare the benefit of the doubt because, these players, Bob, and Wendia, is the bulk of it is the squad that went up 2 years ago, a lot of them 4 years ago as well. And I think with the addition of, Isaac Hayden, Gabriel Sara, and obviously Nunez as well, hopefully Chile. You'd like to think that we have that creativity behind Teemu Pukki to create more chances, but based on yesterday, it's difficult to sort of muster a huge amount of optimism about where a goal is going to come from and how we're going to be at the sharp end of the table, particularly watching Burnley on Friday night. It looked really impressive under Vincent Kompany. I think West Brom looked quite sharp yesterday and got a point at Middlesbrough, who will also be up there. I think it will be tougher for Norwich this season than many fans anticipated. And the other thing from yesterday, which sort of, again, links to what you said, Connor, about sort of mentality and sort of crumbling in the Premier League when the pressure was on, I thought when we went 1 goal down, sort of heads did seem to drop. And when we needed to keep our heads to get back in the game, we completely lost them. And that was shown by, obviously, that 22-man melee and Hanley's subsequent red card. So, on the whole, I'd like to give Smith the benefit of the doubt. I'd like to think, when these 2 or 3 additions come into midfield, that we'll start to score goals. But it's an awful lot of pressure on, a young Brazilian, a not match fit Isaac Hayden, and then potentially another Nunez from Chile to come in and, the expectations on them immediately to deliver and really revolutionise this side. So it wasn't a nice place to be that away end yesterday, and sort of grim sort of echoes of last season. But I'm still hopeful that hopefully a home win at Wigan can sort of really kickstart our season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating kind of what you say there about fan mood, because I think that was kind of obvious if you took the temperature on social media after the game last night. There was a lot of people feeling very frustrated, a lot of people questioning Dean Smith, to be honest, and kind of his methods and his style. And as we said, this is in kind of isolation, Sam. This is one game at the start of the season. Norwich City typically don't start seasons strongly. We said that before the game. We'll say it now as well. I think Chris Gorham had the stat that they've won kind of one of their last 21 opening games, and that's of course opening games. They won 2 years ago against Huddersfield, but they played Luton in the cup beforehand, which is why it's only one. Which I think was that 4-1 win against Blackburn under Alex Neil, and even then they went on to finish outside of the playoffs. So we can't fully say what happens from here, but you're right, it's probably more the performance that caused concern, and the fact that the elements of what Norwich City perhaps didn't do from an attacking perspective, as Will very rightly put, is probably stuff that it's not new. They're not new problems, I suppose, is what I'm saying. We saw them last season. We saw a struggle to score goals last season. We saw Teemu Pukki be isolated last season. We saw it in pre-season. It feels like almost a continuation of a theme rather than something that has appeared overnight.
Yeah, and I overtook the verdict duties as a result of the aforementioned David holiday, and I almost felt bad when I was doing that, because I was saying all these things, and I thought people have heard me and my colleagues talk about this for weeks, and they must be getting bored. I'm getting bored of talking about the same issues, to be honest. But yeah, as you say, Teemu Pukki being an isolated and frustrated figure, who looks quite bored on the pitch, that's becoming a very common occurrence. The lack of creativity, the view of a number of Norwich players standing on the edge of the box, waiting for something to happen, looking unsure of how to make it happen, is something we're getting used to seeing. So, yeah, it's the same sort of problems rearing their heads, and I suppose that's where the sort of no signings argument comes in, and that's where Dean Smith would add that caveat. But it's also, in his job title is the word coach, and he's not just paid to assemble a team and pick a starting 11 from a group of players supplied to him by Stuart Webber. He is there to make players and a group of players as a team better as a whole, and I haven't seen too much evidence of that in the last couple of months. I think it was maybe slightly easier to see what they were trying to do when Smith first came in, and I thought at least they were open about the fact that maybe they were battening down the hatches a little bit and going for something slightly more pragmatic. Whereas now, I spoke to Kenny McLean after the game, and he was keen to say that they're a high-pressing team that wants possession. And I think there were elements of a team that wants to do that, but we're also hearing a lot of noises about athleticism and adding physicality, and it just feels like there's not the same coherence to this football club that there was even 18 months ago, for example. And yeah, those are the issues that we keep talking about, we keep hearing, we keep seeing on the pitch. But the fact that obviously you see it in a championship opener is more alarming. And you couldn't say, when people are sort of defending what was going on in pre-season by saying it is pre-season, you can't argue with that because it's true. But as soon as it's laid bare on a championship pitch when Norwich need to perform, that's when it gets really, really worrying. And I think that's why the mood probably dipped significantly among the Norwich City fan base about 5 o'clock yesterday.
Yeah, and I guess it's difficult in a sense, and this is where I have real sympathy with Dean Smith. I kind of mentioned the new signings aspect. It's really difficult because he's got a group of players that doesn't really feel like they fit together. And I use the front three as a really good example of that. You've got Milo Rashica, who is a player who looks like he wants to play on the counter-attack. Teemu Pukki, who is completely reliant on the service that he's given. He's not a striker that manufactures chances for himself, really. Usually, as we've seen in the last 5 seasons, strives in a possession-based style of play. And then you've got Josh Sargent on the right, who really is someone who wants to press and is keen to press. And then you've got Todd Cantwell behind them trying to link them all together in some way. And I thought he was very good yesterday. And we'll probably get on to Todd a little bit later in the show. But that just shows maybe what Dean Smith is working with, Will, in terms of this squad, because it feels like he's got a lot of odd pieces that almost need to be pulled together as a collective. And at this moment in time, particularly from an attacking perspective, particularly in possession, it feels quite difficult to work out how him and Craig Shakespeare are going to put all those pieces together into something that is cohesive, effective, and that wins at this level.
Yeah, 100% couldn't agree more, Connor. It does feel just sort of very imbalanced. Like, Dean Smith's, been, inherited this side and he's trying to implement some sort of system, but just literally hasn't got the tools to do it. I mean, we know he's a good coach. We know he's taken Aston Villa up from the Championship before. We know what he did at Brentford. His track record speaks for itself. So it is surprising that, it's taken, nothing's clicked yet, essentially. And, like I said before, and I agree with you, Connor, I do have sympathy with Dean Smith and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but equally time is ticking and, I feel like fans are starting to turn very quickly. I mean, there's the sort of Smith out camp now is probably still fairly limited, but I think, don't get a win at home to Wigan next Saturday lunchtime, and I think sort of pressure will really start to intensify. In terms of the style, I remember being at Birmingham for the first game of Daniel Farke's second season in 2018-19, and when Ona Hernandez scored a couple of late goals and we got 2-2 draw, and that was brilliant to watch. It felt like every time we had the ball, we had a clear plan, a strategy, we were getting in behind. Teemu Pukki was making those runs, Demi Buendia was finally in, we had obviously Hernandez on the wing, whereas yesterday, sort of, I think, it hits the nail on the head. We could have played for hours and just not found the back of the net. The only other thing I'd say is, had that Kenny McLean flick gone in and we escaped with a point, we're probably all sort of relatively happy, thinking, unbeaten start to the season, we go into Wigan with a bit more confidence. But I think, as you mentioned, Sam, it wasn't necessarily the result, it was the nature of the performance and the manner of the defeat. And that not only we sort of lost our heads at 1-0 down, but equally, whenever we had the ball, even during that sort of 30 minutes of the first half, after Cardiff started quite well for the first 10 or 15 minutes, bar that save that the keeper made from Cantwell shot from outside the box, we created very little by way of sort of getting in behind. And Teemu Pukki is cutting a very isolated figure up front. And I think, he is starting to look a little bit sort of disinterested, must be thinking, where are these chances going to come from? And that's where these new signings got a really important role to play. But the only, my concern with that is, they're still very raw. They've just come in. Isaac Hayden's not match fit. And they're going to have to really step up very quickly if this Norwich City side is going to improve.
Yeah, the Teemu Pukki thing feels a bit like Grant Holt under Chris Hughton at the moment. Stylistically, just two players or a player in a system that doesn't really seem to be suited to each other. And that, again, is something that Dean Smith is going to have to remedy. I mean, obviously, I spoke to Dean Smith after the game. He felt a draw would have been a fair result. I agree with him. I thought it was a 0-0 game, really, beyond obviously a Romain Sawyer's strike. He thought it was a pass. I'm not quite sure where he got that from, but to me, it looked like a shot anyway. I did take a slight deflection, I think, and swerved into the bottom corner. And that was really the only real piece of quality in the game. But as the guys have mentioned, Norwich had one shot on target. Their XG that they amassed wasn't particularly great. I think it was 0.32. Cardiff also, I think it was 0.08. It was even less. So that shows that the lack of kind of clear cut opportunities in the game and how much of a low margin game it was. And as Will says, I think if this game ended in a draw, the whole conversation and whole debate is probably framed differently, albeit we're probably still talking about the creativity. So maybe the obvious question is, Sam, is this now obviously becomes a priority for Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare. It's about how they resolve those issues at the top end of the pitch. How do they do that? Because the personnel doesn't really look like it's going to change too much. They may add a winger before the end of the window, quite possibly, if the finances are there or something pops up that is doable. But if not, then this is the group they have. They, of course, have Kieran Dowell to come back in as well in that area. You could push Todd Cantwell up, Danel Sinani. How do they solve this? I suppose that's the big question now that is going to be on their shoulders. What is your view? How do they turn this Norwich side, one that looks quite stodgy, quite disjointed from an attacking perspective, into one capable of scoring goals at a consistent level in the Championship?
I think if I had the answer to that question, I wouldn't be on this podcast, unfortunately. I will say that it's an issue that's been bubbling in the background for a good long while now, and they knew it was their plan to sell Emi Buendia, towards the back end of the 2020-21 campaign. And I remember a period during that season when it was Norwich's sort of mini wobble. I think they lost 2-0 to Swansea, drew 0-0 with Millwall, and I think Buendia was unavailable. Might have been suspension. I think it was a suspension. And at that point, everybody sort of said, "What on earth would we do without Buendia?" And I'm sure there were some senior figures at the club at that point that knew that was going to be the question going forward, and they've had now well over a year to try and answer that question, and they haven't been able to. I think maybe more planning should have gone into that, and maybe a more realistic view of the fact that Norwich were incredibly reliant upon Emi Buendia. Let's not beat about the bush. Teemu Pukki was fantastic, but Buendia, Norwich, in my opinion, don't get promoted if they didn't have Buendia that season. So they've known about this problem for a long time, and I don't think the system change was clear enough last season. I've always thought, and I thought, going into the potential sale of Emi Buendia, that if they sell him, they're either going to have to sign an incredible player, the likes of which they probably can't afford, or they're going to have to change the system. And I think under Daniel Farke in the first few games, it was sort of this strange hybrid of what he actually wanted to do and what he felt was realistic with the players that had been signed. Then Dean Smith comes in, and as I referenced, they were a bit more clear about what they wanted to do. But I think now we're back into that sort of odd hybrid. So I would suggest the first step, and I know we keep banging on about this and it's probably getting boring, and a lot of people would probably want to highlight that football is a nuanced sport, and that under Daniel Farke, Norwich had one of the most identifiable systems in the Football League, and they couldn't get close to staying up in the Premier League. But I think we just need to see a plan for what they actually wanted to do and what they want to do. I think at the moment it's almost like we've got some great players. Let's stick them out on the pitch and hope that because they're decent at football, they'll get promoted out of the Championship, and you just can't do that. You saw how well Cardiff were organised, and they've signed 13 players this summer. It's a complete overhaul, and with a few weeks together, they've managed to organise a team that was structured and difficult to get past, and they've managed to beat a team that was recently in the Premier League. So I think you have to really establish what you want to do, and I don't think we've seen that yet. So, as much as I personally, as a football purist, I think I'd say I would like to see a sort of passing possession creative solution in that sense, and I think that would probably be the best setup for Teemu Pukki. I think we'll have to see Gabriel Sara and potentially Marcelino Nunez before we can make that judgment, because if they're not the sorts of creative players that are going to be able to slide those balls in behind, Norwich can't play that style, and there's no point trying. So I think they have to. I would imagine Stuart Webber probably knows what sorts of players those two are. He's done obviously an enormous amount of scouting before deciding to sign them. If they don't fit that model, then go all in on being physical, being direct, whatever you want to do. And although I'm not a huge fan of that, I'd much rather see that than this strange, indefinable hybrid that we're not really seeing what they want to do with that at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because there's this assumption, and I would say probably externally, but also a little bit internally. Kind of what you said there, that people are looking at Norwich, and I did this yesterday. You look at the team sheet in front of me, and you look at their players, and you go, yeah, there's a lot of Milo Rashica, for example, someone who should absolutely be tearing it up at this level. He still might, let's be honest, but that isn't enough for Norwich City to win promotion. Simply saying they're Norwich City, this is what they do. They win the Championship, they come down, everyone knows what to expect from them. That is not enough to get promoted at this level. Having good individual players, as 2016-17 proved, is not necessarily good enough to get promoted at this level. You need to be more than that. You need to have a coherent plan, a strategy, an idea that when games do get chaotic and erratic, and teams are going to see Norwich as a big scalp, they're going to try and drag them into, and for want of a better phrase, a real Championship battle, something that is physical. They're going to try and disrupt and affect Norwich City's game and rhythm by what their own doing, and that's what Cardiff did effectively yesterday. But actually, and I know we keep talking about the two teams that won titles, but both of those had a plan, but also quality to stand up to that kind of erraticness and that could deal with that adversity with that possession-based style of play, with the quality they had in the squad. And at the minute, yesterday, for example, Norwich were 1-0 down in the game. They turned and brought on Jordan Hugill and Onel Hernandez. This isn't not trying to be disrespectful to those players at all, but these are players who weren't really in and around it for either of those title wins and were suddenly being brought on to try and find a goal. And I suppose my question around that, which is probably up for the listeners to answer really, is does that mean Norwich City's squad is now weaker than it was because those players have more of a role, or does it mean that those players have stepped up to a level where they can now be an effective part of Norwich City's squad? I don't know. Maybe it's one that we'll leave hanging in the air. But Will, I'm sure there will be people listening to this thinking, isn't this all a bit of an overreaction? One game into the championship season, it was a 1-0 defeat. I mean, I've kind of read some of the statistics there. It wasn't a great game of football. It was a shot from outside the box that was looked deflected, that kind of won the game for Cardiff. Wasn't one where they created streams of chances. We've already spoken about Norwich City defensively looking quite solid, and I would agree with that assessment. Isn't this all a little bit of an overreaction? What would you kind of say to that question, I suppose? Or is it just the reaction has come because of the context that we've kind of spoken about in terms of last season and in terms of what we've seen in pre-season as well?
I can completely see sort of both sides of it. I think, watching that game yesterday is a continuation of pre-season where, we've not seen much from Norwich City in possession and we've really struggled to create any clear opportunities. I think what has maybe intensified the reaction more than anything is that we have just become so used to going back to the Championship and winning, playing beautiful football, winning games and bouncing straight back up. And I think, especially under a coach like Dean Smith, who's obviously achieved that before, I think probably people did expect us, especially with a winnable-looking fixture away, Steve Morrison-led Cardiff, that looked like a game that we could go and really hit the ground running in and sort of get off to a flyer. So I think that has probably intensified sort of the reaction. And I think another thing as well, sort of, we've gone from Daniel Farke. I saw a lot of people on Twitter last night, for example, saying, we should have never have sacked Farke. His football was brilliant. The Championship would get straight back up. I think, hindsight's obviously a brilliant thing, but, it wasn't working under Daniel Farke. That Leeds game at home when we lost 2-1, they had to make a decision. I think, whether it's the right decision is up for debate, but I think at the time it was completely justifiable, the decision they made. So, and what's happened is we've gone from Daniel Farke, a very emotional, charismatic character who had a real relationship with the fans, to Dean Smith, who, he's obviously a decent bloke, but, is perhaps a bit sort of, less emotional, doesn't have that attachment to the same degree. And I think that's sort of almost strengthening the sort of feeling, sort of angry feelings towards him, if anything. Whereas under Farke, sort of, people were sort of, they understood more if we lost. He was quite honest with the press, etc. So I think that's intensified the reaction. Is it an overreaction? I think on balance, yes. We are one game in. Remember the season in 2018-19? We were shipping goals left, right, and centre, losing 4-3 at home to West Brom. We got off to a really poor start under Farke, but sort of in the relegation zone at the first international break. So I'd say on balance, from what I've seen, I think we've had quite a level-headed sort of balanced discussion here. But I think social media, there has been a bit of an overreaction. But I think we'll know a lot more after the Wigan game next week. And if we don't get something there, then I think fans sort of saying when's this going to work and is Smith the right man? I think they will be sort of more justified. So it's difficult to tell at this stage, and I am sort of one of those in the camp firmly that it is the first game of the season, and that time will tell. The players like you mentioned, Miloš-Rashica, who should be brilliant at this level, can deliver. Pukki will start scoring goals. Someone like Josh Sargent should you spend 9 million on him. You'd think that he should be able to deliver in the Championship. And I think from here, like you mentioned, Sam, there are always sort of two directions of travel. Either the new signings come in, really sort of fit the system that Smith clearly wants to play, and we do that, or we go back to the more direct system that we still actually have relative success in the Premier League in that January window when we played Almeida and Timu Pukki up top, beat Everton at home, went to Watford and beat them 3-0. It's not brilliant to watch, and everyone prefers, I think, to watch sort of more sort of principled, fluent passing football. But equally, if that's not going to get Norwich City out of the Championship, then I'm open to more pragmatic suggestions. So I think it's going to be really fascinating when these new signings come in. Probably in a month, we'll have a closer idea when everyone's sort of back fit, sort of available. Sort of where Norwich City go from here, because it's a real dilemma at the minute.
Yeah, it is, and it's fascinating to see the reaction. I think one thing that is clear, and I keep mentioning kind of that 16-17 season under Alex Neil, patience feels like it will wear out pretty quickly if Norwich City don't get going. Maybe as opposed to, it felt like 2 years ago they kind of had Daniel Farke had enough credit in the bank in order for them to have a slow start, and that was, I think, 1 win in 4. And the first season where they went on to win the title, it was 1 in 6. And then to completely contrast that, in that kind of 16-70 season. I think they lost one of their opening 12. And as we said, finished outside the playoffs, and Alex Neil was gone by March. So it's very difficult to draw any hard and fast conclusions on the opening game. But it is because of the context and what has gone before and the elements of the performance and the new the problems, the fact the problems aren't new, all of that as a culmination and as kind of a mixture, I suppose, as a cocktail, as left people, I would say, with a bit of a sour taste after this weekend, and rightly sort of raised some concerns. I guess the question now is how Dean Smith and Norwich City go about replying to those criticisms and those problems, and how they go about addressing them. Obviously, starting with Wigan next week. Sam, if we focus on some of the positives yesterday, and I kind of mentioned him earlier on, Todd Cantwell. I mean, again, we've spoken about sort of continuations of themes for the wrong reasons in pre-season. This felt like another step forward for him in a 10 role in a 4-2-3-1. Look creative, and we've spoken about frustration. There were plenty of times that he was basically dropping into his own half to get the ball off the centre backs, which kind of maybe highlights Norwich City's struggles with the ball and in possession. But on the whole, came closest to scoring for Norwich City, probably beyond Kenny McLean hitting the bar with that curling shot. There was a lot to like in that performance from Todd Cantwell.
Yeah, I thought he was really good. I gave him in my player ratings a 6, and looking back, I think that was quite unfair, because the reality was there wasn't a huge amount of end product. But when you look at how the players around him performed, I think that's much easier to understand with a little bit more perspective. I thought he was absolutely full of endeavour. He looked like he wanted to, and you referenced it with how deep he dropped to come and collect the ball off the defenders. It felt like he wanted to be in goal, in at the heart of defence, receiving the ball in midfield and then finishing it off in the box. I think he was one of few players very willing to take that responsibility that Kenny McLean spoke at length about following the match. And I think seeing that player willing to take the ball by the horns and actually try and make something happen was really refreshing in a team of players that almost, as we've referenced before, sort of felt like they were out on the pitch and they were good players, so it was bound to happen. It was bound to work out. Cantwell was the only one at times that looked like he realised, okay, we might not score if I don't try and do something here. And I thought there were some really good technical moments. I remember one quite early on in the first half, deep in his own half, slid in, made the sort of tackle that I don't think he's generally associated with. And then under a lot of pressure, some really tidy footwork got him out of a hole and sort of set Norwich away on the counter. And I think that's an area that he can be really important and a real asset, is resisting the press, because there's a lot of teams in this league that will press and be aggressive. Cardiff were one of those sides at their best, and I think Steve Morrison referenced how much he wanted them to do that. Cantwell seems like the sort of player that not only has the temperament and the level-headed confidence to play out in that situation, but also the technical quality, which I think is lacking in the likes of maybe Josh Sargent at times. So yeah, I think there was a lot to be excited about. I think he can play a really key role, but much like Pukki, Cantwell is supposed to be the one providing service, but he can't swap positions with Grant Hanley and take the ball off Tim Krul short from a goal kick and take the ball all the way up to the edge of the box where he can supply Teemu Pukki. As much as Pukki needs supplying in on goal, Cantwell needs supplying in that final third to try and find that pass. And with some of the construction of the play and the lack of willingness among some of the players to make that happen, I don't know if Cantwell's going to be utilised. As long as Norwich don't improve, I don't think he's going to be utilised as much as he needs to be the key asset that he could be for Norwich.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we kind of spoke earlier about solutions to their creativity issues. He does feel like he's probably part of that solution. He's not the sole solution, absolutely not, because we've seen before at Norwich City what a reliance on one player can do. It needs to be a collective improvement. But Will, just kind of your thoughts on Cantwell. I mean, there would have been many people towards the end of last season who would have thought you were pretty mad if you were saying, right, on the opening day of next season, Todd Cantwell will not only still be at Norwich City, but he'll also be starting and probably their best player on the day. I mean, it kind of shows that this redemption arc that he's been on throughout pre-season is continuing in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously a brilliant player. You know, everyone knows about his ability and his talent. I mean, look at, you know, how he blossomed towards the end of the 18-19 season, coming in and playing in that three behind Teemu Pukki, and then, you know, sort of, you know, propelling himself into the national spotlight with a series of brilliant performances in the Premier League the year after. It's hard to identify sort of what's happened to him over the last sort of year or two, whether it be, you know, a lot of people blame sort of off-field issues and social media and attitude. It seems a bit harsh, so no one really knows what's going on behind the scenes. But, you know, I wrote my first PinkUn column on him this week, and I think he's going to be a really important player for us. And, you know, everybody knows the evidence is there that a fit and firing and focused Todd Cantwell is, you know, arguably Norwich City's best player with Emi Buendia now gone. And I think if anyone's going to, you know, fill that void, like you mentioned, Sam, with Buendia now Aston Villa, then Cantwell is probably the closest we've got. But equally, that is just one small part of the Norwich City jigsaw. And, you know, he needs, you know, players like a Kenny McLean or somebody like an Oliver Skip or Alex Tettey to, you know, provide that protection and that, you know, passing sort of radar behind him for him to get the ball in those pockets of space in advanced position for him to provide that service to Teemu Pukki. So I think, you know, he can be a really important player for us. He looked really good at Celtic Park last weekend as well. Again, was one of our best players yesterday. So I think he was probably one of the very few positives. The only other one that I probably wanted to highlight was Andrew Omobamidele, who I mentioned, who I think, you know, is going to be a massive player for us. You know, Ben Gibson's obviously been there, done that in the Championship, was a key part of the side that got us up a couple of years ago, but it seems as though clearly he's leapfrogged him in Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare's pecking order. I think he could be a really key player. But I think that other than those two, there weren't a huge number of positives to take from yesterday. But no, completely agree in terms of Cantwell, and fingers crossed that, you know, we continue to play a system, or at least implement an enhanced system that can be sort of conducive to the way that he plays football.
We live Norwich City.
The build-up.
The passion.
The drama.
The last-minute winners.
The debate.
That's why we've created PinkUn Plus.
The app that takes you beyond the headlines.
With exclusive columns, blogs, podcasts and videos, we've got you covered.
Subscribe today. PinkUn Plus. Stay ahead of the game.
Download now on the App Store and on Google Play. Absolutely. It's incredible that Andrew Omobamidele is only just 20 as well. I think he was 20 June, wasn't he? So that's staggering, the maturity that he plays with. I mean, there's been a lot of pressure that's been heaped on his very, very young shoulders, but he just seems to not particularly look fazed by it or affected by it. Just kind of strolls through games. There was one moment in the first half yesterday where he took the ball out from the back and sort of surged forward and progressed Norwich up the pitch. It was a wonderful bit of play. I don't think Norwich did anything with the ball subsequently, but there was at least that attempt to get Norwich up the pitch. And Sam, I guess from other positive standpoints, I mean, we've spoken a lot, probably for as long as I can remember, really, about Norwich City and their defensive record and structure, and how and usually the debate that we've kind of had in the first half of the show is usually flipped. It's usually Norwich City are very capable at scoring goals, but it's the other end that they have sort of problems and struggles with. Yesterday, they looked more structured, I thought, out of possession. I thought, as I kind of said earlier on, it was much more identifiable what they were trying to do without the ball than it perhaps was with the ball. And they had that sort of half an hour spell where they were pressing well, and they obviously forced that opportunity that Ryan Alsop saved from Todd Cantwell. There was a lot of energy. Physically, they looked pretty good. They looked very fit, very capable. So if you use that as a base and as a structure, and I think evidence shows in this league, if you can be relatively tight at the back, then maybe Norwich City don't need a completely dramatic uplift in terms of output at the other end of the pitch. They just need to be consistent in terms of the goals that they're scoring. But if you're Dean Smith, that at least gives you a base to work from as you try and find some solutions to their attacking issues.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But, you know, as we discussed, I've covered 5 competitive games now and I've seen 1 goal. So, you know, it takes at least 1 to win a game, for anyone that wasn't aware of that fact. And they're not getting close to those numbers yet. It's also difficult when, yes, structurally and generally, I thought they were very good defensively, Norwich, yesterday, and they didn't really look threatened at any point. The only goal that Cardiff had wasn't a chance, really, was it? It was just a fantastic finish that, well, Dean Smith would obviously call it lucky, but I thought it was a very good finish from Romain Sawyers. But this is the problem, really, is that you switch off for 2 seconds, which is what Jakob Sorensen did, and Max Aarons did it in the lead up to the goal when Callum O'Dowda beat him as well. you switch off for 2 seconds, and that's what can happen at the highest levels of football. Yes, it may not happen as regularly as it does in the Premier League. Maybe against Manchester City, there would have been 2 or 3 of those goals popping in had Norwich sort of fell asleep like they did for that moment. But, the fact was nobody put Romain Sawyers under pressure. He's got a decent shot on goal, and he's a very good professional footballer. There's always a decent chance that that's going to happen. So, yeah, structurally and tactically, I think it's that's not going to be a problem, and I think that's the real encouraging sign from this, because I think that's more difficult to construct as a team. It's more difficult to construct a team that doesn't concede many chances than it is to just tell your players to switch on. But nevertheless, it is something they need to improve on. And if Jakob Sorensen is going to feature in that defensive midfield role again, and he's going to have strong competition whenever Isaac Hayden does return, he really can't let that happen again. And, Norwich as a defence need to remember, well, basically to switch on. And I know that's a very basic and simple thing to say, but that shows you how poor it is when it does happen. And they need to eliminate those mistakes. As soon as they do that, as you referenced, I think they look quite solid. They look quite hard to beat. And with some of the Championship's best defenders, that's easy to explain. But they just need to cut out those errors. And then I think those problems are slightly resolved, and probably nothing to worry about if they want to be up there come the end of the season.
Yeah, and you see this quite a lot with teams, actually, that when they try and focus on one end of the pitch, often the other one gets affected in a negative fashion. So, again, maybe the focus has been on ensuring that they're a bit tighter at the back. And maybe, again, I haven't been in training, so it's hard to say. But coaching a team to be attacking, to be fluent when they're attacking and chance creation, scoring a goal, is that sort of old adage, isn't it? Scoring a goal is the hardest thing to do in football. That is probably harder at this moment in time to construct from a solid base, rather than perhaps having a team that is kind of consistent in scoring goals but needs to tighten up at the other end. And you kind of take one away from one end and it can affect the other, and all of that kind of balance that we spoke about earlier on the show. But I don't want to sort of cover old ground. Will, what did you think of Jakob Sorensen yesterday? Because we've seen a lot of him in positions that aren't natural to him. We've seen him play at left back, we've seen him play at centre back. We haven't seen too much of him play in central midfield, which is obviously the position that he was recruited to play for. I mean, my take is, and the goal probably showed he was a little bit too passive, I felt, in terms of actually getting to Romain Sawyers. But there were points in the game where he either overcommitted in certain phases of play, or didn't quite press well enough to reduce the space, as showed by the goal he conceded. What did you make of him in that role? Because I think I get the sense there's been quite a clamour to see him in that position and to see what he can do. And maybe there's been a little bit of confusion and questions asked about why he isn't in that role more consistently. What did you make of his performance, and what do you make of that role moving forward, with obviously what we've spoken about already about Isaac Hayden coming back towards the end of the month, or towards the end of August, all being well, different midfield options coming in? Did he do enough, in your view, to kind of nail down that position into the next few weeks, I suppose, where there is an opportunity there?
Yeah, I think he's a really interesting player and a really interesting example. Obviously, came in and slotted in seamlessly in that left back role where he'd never played in his life a couple of years ago, and really took the position by storm and really impressed Norwich City fans. And then obviously last year, I remember he sort of came in at centre back against Manchester United, I think, and had a really assured, decent game. And like you said, there is this sort of clamour and desire to see him in his sort of natural position. I think for me, when you look at him, he does look a little bit sort of lightweight. I don't know if that's sort of harsh or not, but you look at the players who've played in that position with Kenny McLean before, and your Alex Tettey and Oliver Skips, and there's that real sort of combativeness, robust base, whereas and Kenny can sort of get forward a bit more, and there's that element of trust and protection behind him. I think with Sorensen, he doesn't fill me with a huge amount of confidence. I think he's his passing range is okay. It's interesting that Dean Smith said he'd like to see him pass the ball forward a bit more, and he's quite sort of conservative in the decisions that he makes, and I think that's sort of bang on. But just from a physical point of view, I don't know if he is that player that can sit in front of the back four if we're playing either a 4-2-3-1 or in a 3 as well. I don't know if he is that player that can really help City sort of mount a real sort of surge for promotion. I think if you look at who came before him, they probably were more sort of experienced, trustworthy sort of campaigners who offered more protection in front of that defence. And I think, like you said, he had a bit of a mixed game yesterday, Connor. I thought he actually started okay. I thought the first 10 or 15 minutes he wasn't bad, but you mentioned for the goal, and in the second half he didn't really seem. I mean, it links to what we were saying earlier about sort of a lack of a complete plan for Norwich. He didn't seem completely 100% about what he was meant to be doing, be it overcommitting, pressing, undercommitting at certain times. So he's not, he is by no means the issue. He is maybe one small part of the issue in terms of Norwich City's midfield dilemma. But I think going forward, I would like to see a player like Isaac Hayden in that position with Kenny McLean, rather than probably Sorensen or Jacob Sorensen.
Absolutely. I mean, from kind of one midfielder to another, Sam, it looks like, and obviously we've had the story on our sites this morning about Marcelino Nunez. There we go. I think I've said that right. The Chilean international midfielder who Norwich City have been heavily linked with. I'm trying to pronounce the name of the team. Well, do I do it? I don't know. You're probably in a bad position to do this, right? Go on, Sam. Have a go. Tell me what it is.
Católica.
There we go. Católica. Their manager has effectively bid him a farewell. And for anyone who's seen any clips of kind of his last appearance, or what is perceived to be his last appearance, there was a big standing ovation. Obviously, there's some quotes from the coach that was quite emotional. Also from Maurizio Isla, who's had a career in Europe with Udinese, Juventus, QPR, saying that he's off to Europe as well. That destination, we believe, is Norwich City. Norwich have been obviously looking for a third midfield option after the departure of Pierre Lees-Malou, who left to head back to France earlier this month. What do you make of this one, Sam? Because it was kind of a lot of talk around Ismail Kone last week, the Canadian international who plays for Montreal in the MLS. That has kind of fallen by the wayside. Sounds like kind of a failure to agree personal terms more than anything. That then obviously kind of moved this pursuit on a little bit. Another potential recruit from South America. We've kind of had that old conversation about Norwich City expanding their operations in that area. It's obviously a market that they feel there's a lot of value in, but Chilean international midfielder, played in the Chilean Premier League. I mean, probably a lot of the conversation around him is similar to what we had around Gabriel Sara, right? In terms of it comes down to how he adapts and how quickly he can kind of get up to speed with the league. But on the surface of it, what do you make of this addition, and what do you think he will bring to Norwich City's midfield, given obviously what we've spoken about in the first 41 minutes of the show?
He looks like a very technically capable player, and I'd suggest he's more likely to bring that creative profile maybe than Gabriel Sara will. I think Sara is maybe more than people are currently realising going to bring a physical presence. But, Nunez is only 5'8". He's not been being brought in to, play that similar role. I think something worth referencing is his energy. Dean Smith does place a lot of stock in running stats. He's spoken at great length about Sara's running stats, actually, but it shows you that when he talks about athleticism and needing to improve that in the Norwich squad, he doesn't just mean size and muscle. He means, the ability to go, play at high percentages of effort for longer in matches. And I think that's what Nunez will bring, but that's the boring side of things. I think the good thing is that he looks like a pretty creative attacking player, and if Gabriel Sara isn't going to bring that, I think maybe people were quite keen, and that showed you how much people wanted that player to crowbar him into that role. But I think Nunez looks like somebody that's going to be more likely to occupy that position. It's something that I think Norwich desperately need. I don't know if internally they think it's as important as maybe I do, but I hope he's going to add the ability to beat players, spark something, hopefully the ability to play a decent through ball, because, for all of Cantwell's strengths, and he played a nice couple of diagonals and little chipped balls, there were a couple of balls which he could have played through. There was one at Celtic which could have gone through to Pukki that didn't, and then there was one I thought Sargent would have been in a great position if Cantwell could have slotted him through down the right side in the second half yesterday. So I don't know if that's one of his strengths, and Pukki is absolutely crying out for somebody that can do that. So I would hope that that's something that's in his repertoire. He looks more likely to be able to do that than a lot of the players at Norwich have in that position at present. But yeah, he looks more of that profile, and I think that's absolutely good news for Norwich City fans, and it's probably even better news for Tamer Pukki.
Yeah, I always stray away from YouTube supercuts. I think I try to anyway. I can't remember which player. It might have been Johan Elmander that I watched once and was like, wow, what a player Norwich City have got on their hands here. And obviously that didn't pan out in the right way. And I think since then I've kind of told myself just to stray away from them. I have, however, seen one goal, which was a volley with his left foot, I think, which was an absolute stormer. I mean, it was not too dissimilar from Alex Tetty's against Sunderland all those years ago in the Premier League. It was excellent. But beyond that, I haven't seen too much. I've read a lot about him. I've kind of had a look at various statistics and stuff. It looks like he's quite tenacious. He's not the biggest player in the world, but looks like he plays with intensity. And I guess, Will, he's got that added extra of being a completely unknown quantity, which seems to create more excitement around the signing, certainly from my perspective, at least, anyway.
Yeah, I'm really excited by it. I mean, who can't, Norwich, delving into the South American market for an attacking midfielder. It's just, every fan's dream pretty much. I mean, like you said, it is just a complete unknown quantity. You look at players like Christoph Zolis or someone like Yannick Wiltshire, who had an unreal highlights reel from memory when we signed him from Wigan. And, look what's happened to him since. Or he could be, you mentioned that word tenacity with that real technical ability. Massive shoes to fill, but they sound like the characteristics of Emi Buendia. So I think the real question is how will he adapt to life in the Championship? That Saturday, Tuesday, relentless nature, the physicality. Teams are obviously going to press him high and be sort of very physical and look to close him down. I think like you mentioned with his stats and sort of I've seen that goal as well, that sort of left-footed thunderbolt. Clearly the ability is there. The real question is, can he do it? Can he do it in the Championship in English football? And like links to what I said sort of earlier before, there is a lot of pressure on his young shoulders and Gabriel Sara as well to really come in and adapt quickly. Because like you mentioned, Sam, I'd like to think the club are, acutely aware as much as we are, how important it is to get a player in that position who can service Teemu Pukki is fundamentally probably the main issue that we've been discussing. So I think, will it work? I think it probably has to work if, Norwich City are going to mount any sort of charge for promotion, playing this style of football, because as it stands, we don't have a player who can do that. Like you mentioned, Cantwell probably is the closest we've got, but there were a couple of moments yesterday in pre-season where, maybe he didn't make the right decision. But I think in Nunez, we've got to have our fingers crossed that he can be that player. So I'm really excited by it. And fingers crossed, everything gets over the line and, we see him, sooner rather than later, because it's exactly what Norwich City need at the moment.
Absolutely. I think reports in Chile suggest that he's due to travel to Europe or to England to sort of finalise that move. Obviously, Chilean reports suggesting Norwich City very heavily. I would agree with those reports. Let's see where we are in the next few days, and who knows? Potentially, we'll be talking about him as an option for Wigan, depending on obviously a deal getting done first and foremost, which is the most important thing before we have that conversation. It's just struck me that we've got 46 minutes into the show and we've not even spoken about the mass melee that went on in the second half that led to 4 yellow cards. I think 3 for Cardiff, 1 for Norwich. I've kind of watched it back. I think Andrew Omobamidele and Max Aarons in particular are very fortunate not to have got their names into the book. But Sam, that kind of incident led to the yellow cards of Perry NG first and foremost, but also of Grant Hanley. Both of them saw red for second bookings for different incidents thereafter. Both kind of silly fouls, actually, quite soft in truth, both of them. What did you make of kind of those decisions and that more generally? Because I mean, not really sure. I've got to be honest, I watched it back this morning. Not really sure why Perry NG goes down holding his face when he gets pushed in the chest. That's quite... I mean, if he's getting pain in his head when someone's pushed him in the chest, he probably needs a doctor, doesn't he, I would suggest?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was about, and neither was Dean Smith in his post-match press conference. But Smith actually fully said that Grant Hanley was, it was fair for him to be sent off. I'm not particularly sure about the second yellow, and having watched the replay of the melee, I'm struggling on the first yellow, to be honest. I did watch the club's highlights. I don't think they were likely to include many explicit replays of Hanley doing whatever he did, but I found it pretty difficult to pick out what he's done differently to a number of players that were involved in that, as you said.
Well, it also, sorry to cut across, but the one angle I saw of it this morning, actually looks like Andrew Omobamidele is the man who pushes Perry NG rather than Grant Hanley, and yet he's gone into the book. So I think he's almost been booked for NG's reaction more than anything else, which seems quite harsh. Yeah,
but that's what you get in the Championship, isn't it? Really, and I don't like to just bash referees, but it is their job, and they are, they're getting paid significantly to do much, much better than Tim Robinson did at the Cardiff City Stadium yesterday. I think that highlighted the, coming back down to earth that Championship refereeing is. I'm not saying it's fantastic in the Premier League, but it's definitely a little way above that. And we've had a couple of interesting conversations where I've maybe defended VAR, and I feel like yesterday was I think it might have been 1-0 to Sam in that situation, to be honest. But I think it's something Norwich are going to have to contend with throughout the season. Kenny McLean spoke about it after the match, and Dean Smith actually felt that his side handled the emotional side of the occasion pretty well. But Norwich are going to be the favourites in most matches that they play. They're going to be the bigger club in most of the matches that they play, and teams aren't going to have any problems going down, holding their face when they've been pushed in the chest, or taking a minute and a half to take a throw in. That's going to be something that Norwich are going to have to get used to, and they're going to have to cope with that, because there will be games where they'll be 1-0 down again, and they'll have to collect themselves and try and find a way through without being impacted by that. So I think Norwich's ability to deal with those sorts of situations is going to be something that's going to have an impact as the whole championship season pans out, because it's something they didn't really have to deal with a lot last season. I can't remember the number of times they were in the lead, but I don't think it was loads. And it was something they didn't have to worry about. But yeah, I think that whole melee, that whole situation, it's quite needless. Felt like a lot of handbags about nothing. And yeah, there's not a side of the game that I particularly love, especially when we have to dissect it and try and work out which players have done what. I think they were all almost as bad as each other. Although, yeah, I wouldn't promote Ng's behaviour. I think if I had done that on a Sunday League pitch, I would have been very embarrassed very quickly.
There's an irony that was the closest a lot of Norwich City players got to Teemu Pukki all afternoon. But we'll part that. Thank you. I mean, to be fair, I mean you've kind of spoken about Tim Robinson. I wasn't actually going to mention him, but I will kind of close that. I've not really, I've got to be honest, seen him referee a game particularly well at any point. He's been in the Championship for a long time now, and given the constant move up of referees, if you've stayed at that level for quite a period of time without ever really getting pushed into the Premier League, I think you probably look at yourself as an official and go, am I good enough? Possibly. There were some very questionable decisions, although in his defence, I did feel he got the bookings for that right. I think all the players he booked probably should have been booked in that melee, with the exception probably of Omar Ramadeli and Aarons, who probably should have found themselves in the book but didn't. But that is what it is. He probably didn't see a lot of it, to be honest, because it was 22 players involved and there were separate incidents at the same time. So that is what it is, really. Will, let's end with you then. After this game, how are you feeling more widely about Norwich City this season in the Championship? I mean, we've kind of spoken about this game in isolation, but is there a confidence from your perspective that they will be able to get going in the right direction, that they will be able to fix some of the issues that we've spoken about over the last hour or so? Or is that concern from yesterday something that you feel could prolong in the weeks ahead?
I think, over the last 24 hours, I definitely have become more concerned. I'm not going to, lie about that. So I really thought, having been in Scotland last weekend where it wasn't great, some of my mates say, it wasn't brilliant, but I think things will click for the first game of the season. I really had confidence they would, having seen, a continuation and a maintenance of those themes, the lack of cohesion, the lack of creativity, the lack of any clear plan. It has definitely amplified my concern. I can't lie about that. And I am quite nervous about the Wigan game, because I do feel like, as we mentioned, for various factors that we've discussed, pressure is mounting on Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare quite rapidly. And I think a home defeat or anything but 3 points at home will really sort of heighten that atmosphere among fans that, maybe he's not the right man for the job. So that said, I do have a degree of confidence that things will get better. They can only get better. They have to get better because, yesterday is one of the sort of most toothless, lack of cutting edge Norwich City attacking performances I remember seeing for a long time. So I'm hopeful that the new signings we've discussed, the addition of, a beefy sort of experienced presence in Isaac Hayden in front of the back four, can really sort of bolster Norwich's midfield. And then, plugging that gap in terms of the creativity, I'm really hopeful that, maybe the addition of, Kieran Dow when he's available as well, and the two signings that we've mentioned can really sort of start to service Teemu Pukki. I do think, all issues aside and however bad yesterday was, I do think that it's not the strongest Championship we've ever seen. I know Burnley looked, impressive on Friday night. Middlesbrough will be up there, probably West Brom, Sheffield United as well, who are playing today. But I do struggle to see Norwich not being in and around the top six. obviously looking at yesterday, it's not going to be anywhere near as easy as it has been the last couple of times where we've romped the title. But I do, like I said, I'm normally relatively optimistic, and I like to give managers and players the benefit of the doubt. And I'm hopeful that we can beat Wigan on Saturday, see a sort of slightly more polished sort of creative performance, and with these new signings coming in throughout the next few weeks, really start to sort of pick up sort of a bit of form. But that said, there are issues, and I'm not blind to those. But I'm hopeful we can sort of turn our fortunes around.
Sam, final word from you on the pod. Let's end with something positive. Give me something positive to end the pod on.
A couple of lovely kits for Norwich fans to enjoy. I thought Ono Hernandez was relatively promising, probably had more of an impact than I was expecting from him for most of this season. So yeah, there we go. I feel like that's enough. We've still got 45 to go, and Norwich have been terrible at the start of the season before, and then been promoted. There you go. Three reasons to be optimistic. That's not bad at all.
That's not bad at all, and that's the perfect note to end the pod on. We've got 41 weeks of the season remaining, folks, so there's still plenty of time for Norwich City to turn it around. 45 games, in fact, and we all know with the Championship, one thing is for sure, you can't say anything with absolute certainty, given the way that it twists and turns. That concludes the show for this week. Sam, thank you very much for joining me. Will, thank you very much for stepping in on this week's show. Brilliant to have you with us, and you can read Will's columns throughout this season with us. I think they'll be on our website, on our app, in print as well. So make sure to keep your eye out for those across the campaign. And hopefully, Will, they'll be a bit more positive than our conversation has been over the last 55 minutes or so. Thank you very much for listening. Fingers crossed for a positive result next weekend against Wigan. Enjoy your week. Let's hope that Norwich City can get a deal for a certain Chilean midfielder over the line. And hopefully those optimism banks will be relatively renewed as we head to Carrow Road next weekend. Thanks for listening. See you soon.